Jake Morrison's boots hit the polished marble floor with a soft thud as he stepped out of the transport shuttle. For a moment he just stood there taking it all in. He'd seen pictures during the briefing back on Earth, read all the reports, studied the cultural guidelines until his eyes crossed. But none of it had prepared him for this. The palace stretched out before him like something from a fever dream. Massive crystalline spires twisted upward into skies that weren't quite the right shade of blue. More purple actually, with clouds that moved too fast and seemed to shimmer with their own light. The building itself looked alive somehow, its walls reflecting colors that didn't exist in Earth's spectrum. Alien dignitaries moved through corridors so wide you could fly a fighter jet through them without scraping the walls. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6. Some floated. One creature seemed to be made entirely of living water, leaving a wet trail as it glided past. Jake swallowed hard. He was Earth's newest ambassador to the Galactic Empire, a position he'd fought hard to get. Now, standing here, he wondered if he was actually ready for this. A shadow fell across him. Jake looked up, and up, at the towering reptilian figure looming over him. The creature had to be at least 8 feet tall, with scales that gleamed like polished emeralds and eyes that held all the warmth of a snake watching a mouse. "Ambassador Morrison," the reptilian said, his voice a deep rumble that Jake felt in his chest. "I am Drask, your assigned escort. Welcome to the throne world of Empress Valora. Her Majesty has prepared quite the display for your arrival." "I'm honored," Jake managed, trying not to sound as intimidated as he felt. Drask's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "This way. Her Majesty wishes to show you the Imperial Menagerie. We house the galaxy's most prized specimens there, including the legendary Fenrix predators." Jake followed, his mind racing. He'd read about Fenrix during the long journey from Earth. The descriptions had been impressive but vague, wolf-like creatures the size of horses, with fur so black it seemed to drink in the light around them. Their eyes supposedly glowed amber in the dark, and according to every Imperial record he could find, they were the most loyal and lethal companions in the known galaxy. Warriors across 100 worlds paid fortunes just for the chance to bond with one. The walk to the menagerie took them through corridor after corridor of impossible architecture. Gravity seemed optional in some sections. Jake watched a group of officials casually walking on the ceiling above him. In other areas, the walls displayed living murals that shifted and changed, telling stories of conquest and glory. Finally, they emerged into an enormous open space. Jake's first thought was that they'd entered a zoo. His second thought, as he took in the crowd and the arena-style seating, was much darker. This wasn't a zoo. It was a coliseum. Hundreds of alien spectators packed the observation decks that ringed the central arena. Some were eating strange foods, others making what sounded like bets. Down in the arena itself, Jake watched as guards put various creatures through what Drask proudly called trials. His stomach churned as he realized what that actually meant. The Empire was testing these beings for worthiness, and the ones who failed. Jake didn't want to think about what happened to the failures. The crowd's noise swelled suddenly and Jake saw why. High above the arena, on a floating throne that defied every law of physics Jake understood, sat Empress Valora herself. She was smaller than Jake expected, almost delicate-looking, but something about her presence made the entire arena feel like it was holding its breath. Next, Valora's voice rang out, amplified somehow to fill every corner of the massive space. "Bring forth the defective one." Jake watched as a half-dozen guards marched into the arena, dragging something between them. No, not something. Someone. The Fenrix. But this wasn't the magnificent predator Jake had read about. This creature was smaller than the others he'd glimpsed in holding pens around the arena. Its midnight black fur was matted and dirty, marked with dozens of scars that told stories of pain Jake didn't want to imagine. The creature's legs shook as the guards released it and backed away. Energy barriers hummed to life around the Fenrix, forming a cage of crackling purple light. Jake had seen demonstrations of those barriers during his security briefing. They were designed to deliver escalating electric shocks until the subject showed appropriate aggressive behavior. The test began. The first shock hit the Fenrix like a hammer. The creature yelped, a sound so raw and terrified that Jake felt it in his bones, and tried to back away from the barrier. But there was nowhere to go. Another shock. The Fenrix's legs buckled and it dropped low to the ground, trembling all over. It wasn't fighting back. It wasn't showing aggression. It was just scared. The crowd's reaction hit Jake like a second shock. They were laughing. Hundreds of aliens from dozens of species, and they were laughing at a terrified creature being tortured for their entertainment. "Pathetic," Empress Valora announced, her voice dripping with contempt. This creature displays fear. Fear is weakness. Weakness has no place in our glorious empire. She raised one elegant hand and Jake saw her claws extend. Execute it. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake's body moved before his brain caught up. He stepped forward, away from Drask, toward the arena floor. His voice came out louder than he'd intended, echoing across the sudden silence. Wait. Every eye in the menagerie turned to look at him. Hundreds of alien faces, expressing emotions Jake couldn't begin to read. And high above, on her floating throne, Empress Velora's gaze locked onto him like a predator spotting prey. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to keep speaking. Jake woke up to his communicator buzzing like an angry hornet. He groaned, rolled over, and immediately regretted checking the screen. 73 messages. No, wait, 85. The number kept climbing as he watched. He scrolled through them with growing disbelief. Apparently, his little stunt at the menagerie had been broadcast across the entire galactic network. Some messages mocked him. One alien species he couldn't even pronounce had posted a meme calling humans the galaxy's emotional support species. Others seemed genuinely curious about what he planned to do with the broken predator. A few were outright threatening, warning him that interfering with imperial traditions would have consequences. Jake tossed the communicator onto his nightstand and rubbed his face. He'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, spending the rest of the night hunched over his tablet, digging through every piece of Earth research he could find on animal psychology, trauma recovery, and rehabilitation techniques. His eyes felt like sandpaper and his coffee had gone cold hours ago. But he'd learned something important. If Ash could speak, even in that broken, painful way, then this wasn't just an animal. This was a person. A person who'd been hurt, broken down, and treated like a thing instead of a being with thoughts and feelings. Jake wasn't going to let that continue. Not on his watch. He showered quickly, dressed in comfortable clothes instead of his formal ambassador outfit, and grabbed a handful of ration packs from the embassy kitchen. Then he headed to the private training yard they'd set up for Ash in the back of the compound. The Fenrix was exactly where Jake had left him the night before, curled up in the far corner of the yard. Ash's amber eyes tracked Jake's every movement, and his massive body was tense, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Jake's heart ached looking at him. This creature should have been magnificent. Instead, fear had made him small. "All right, Ash," Jake said softly, keeping his voice calm and even. He settled down on the ground about 15 feet away from the Fenrix, crossing his legs and making himself as non-threatening as possible. "We're going to try something different today. No pain. No tests. No trials. Just you and me figuring this out together. Deal?" Ash didn't respond. His ears were flat against his head, and every muscle in his body screamed that he expected punishment. Jake pulled out one of the ration packs and unwrapped it slowly, making sure Ash could see every movement. The smell of synthesized meat, the closest thing to real food the embassy stores had, wafted through the yard. Jake's stomach rumbled. He'd skipped breakfast. He took a small bite himself, chewing thoughtfully, then tore off a piece and tossed it gently toward Ash. It landed about halfway between them. "Your choice," Jake said quietly. "No pressure. No tricks. If you want it, take it. If you don't, that's okay too." Then he waited. And waited. His legs started to cramp. His back complained about sitting on the hard ground. A small insect-like creature buzzed around his head, and he had to resist the urge to swat at it. But he didn't move. Didn't push. Just sat there, occasionally taking another bite of the ration pack, showing Ash that the food was safe. 10 minutes crawled by. Then 15. Jake was starting to wonder if this was going to work when he saw Ash's nose twitch. The Fenrix was sniffing the air, processing the scent of the food. His eyes never left Jake, but his body language shifted slightly. Still wary, still ready to run, but curious now. At the 20-minute mark, Ash moved. It was barely more than a creep, low to the ground, muscles coiled tight, but he moved toward the piece of meat. When he got within a few feet of it, he froze, watching Jake intently. Jake didn't react. Didn't move. Just sat there breathing slowly. Ash darted forward, snatched the meat in his jaws, and retreated back to his corner in one fluid motion. Jake's heart soared, but he kept his face neutral. No sudden celebrations. Nothing that might scare Ash. Instead, he just smiled a little and tossed another piece. This time, a bit closer to himself. The second piece took less time. Ash approached more confidently, though he still flinched when a breeze rustled the leaves overhead. He grabbed the meat and backed away, but not quite as far this time. Third piece. Closer still. Fourth piece. Ash was now only about 6 feet away. Jake's legs had gone completely numb, but he ignored the discomfort. This was working. Slowly, painfully slowly, but it was working. By the time the sun reached its peak in the purple sky, Ash was eating directly from Jake's hand. The Fenrix was still nervous, his whole body trembled slightly every time he leaned in, but he was doing it. Choosing to trust even just a little bit. Jake wanted to shout with joy. Instead, he just kept his hand steady and his voice soft, murmuring encouragement with each piece Ash took. That's it. You're doing great. See, nothing bad happens here. Just food and safety. That's all this is. Across the galaxy, in a room filled with monitors and displays that showed every corner of the Empire, Empress Valora stared at the security feed from the human embassy with something between confusion and irritation. What is he doing? She demanded, gesturing at the screen where Jake sat motionless on the ground, feeding the Fenrix by hand. This is absurd. The creature should be in combat training, learning discipline and obedience. Beth stood at attention nearby, her scarred face carefully neutral. She was one of only a handful of humans who'd earned any respect in the Imperial military, and that had come through years of brutal combat trials that had left their marks on her body and soul. She studied the screen for a long moment before answering. He's using positive reinforcement, Your Majesty. It's an Earth technique for working with traumatized animals. No punishment, only reward. You shape behavior by encouraging what you want rather than punishing what you don't want. Valora's claws clicked against the arm of her chair. Ridiculous. You don't create warriors with kindness. You forge them through hardship, through pain, through proving they can survive anything. Beth said nothing, but her eyes remained fixed on the screen. She watched Jake sit patiently as the Fenrix slowly, hesitantly, learned to approach him. She saw the gentleness in the ambassador's movements, the careful way he made himself small and unthreatening. And she saw something else. Something that made her think of her own early days, when Imperial trainers had broken her down and built her back up into a weapon. She wondered, not for the first time, what she might have become if someone had offered her kindness instead of cruelty. If someone had seen her as a person worth nurturing rather than a tool worth sharpening. On the screen, Ash laid his massive head in Jake's lap for the first time. The human's face lit up with pure joy. Beth's expression remained carefully blank, but something shifted behind her eyes. Maybe she thought the Empire had been doing this wrong all along. Empress Valora sat on her throne like a statue carved from ice and fury. Her fingers drummed a slow, deliberate rhythm against the armrest. Tap, tap, tap. A sound that echoed through the silent chamber like a countdown to something terrible. Around her, the Imperial court held its collective breath, hundreds of alien officials watching the screens with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed fear. The footage played again. The fifth time Valora had watched it, though no one dared point that out. 3 assassins, the Empire's best, reduced to unconscious heaps in under 90 seconds. And at the center of it all, the Fenrix. The defective one. The creature they'd all laughed at in the arena. Moving like nothing they'd ever seen before. Beth stood at rigid attention beside the throne, her scarred hands clasped behind her back. She'd been summoned the moment the assassination attempt failed, and she'd spent the last 4 hours reviewing combat footage until her eyes burned. The human unlocked something, she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. I've gone through every Fenrix combat record in our archives, and Your Majesty, we have records going back 3 millennia. None of them, not a single one, has displayed psychic abilities in over 2,000 years. We all assumed the capacity had been bred out of them through generations of captivity. Or, Valora said, her voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze stars, they were hiding it. All this time. Hiding what they could do. She gestured, and the throne room's walls lit up with dozens of additional screens. Reports flooding in from across the Empire, each one more disturbing than the last. Beth watched them with growing unease. One screen showed a gladiatorial pit on a mining world. A Fenrix stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by handlers with electric prods. The creature should have been fighting the opponent released into the pit with it. Instead, it simply sat down. The handlers activated their prods. The Fenrix didn't even flinch. It just sat there, staring at them with eyes that seemed to look through them instead of at them. Another screen displayed footage from a wealthy merchant's estate. A bonded Fenrix had saved the merchant's child from a collapsing support beam, moving with impossible speed to shield the kid from the debris. That part was normal. Fenrix were known for protecting their bonded handlers. But afterward, when the grateful merchant had ordered the creature to return to its kennel, the Fenrix had simply looked at him. Just looked. Those amber eyes fixed on the merchant with an intelligence that was suddenly, terrifyingly obvious. Then it had walked away on its own terms, ignoring every command. Screen after screen showed similar incidents. Fenrics across hundreds of worlds, all becoming more alert, more aware, less willing to simply obey without question. "They're waking up," Beth said quietly, though the words felt inadequate for what they were witnessing. "All of them. It's like Ash flipped a switch, and suddenly every Fenrix in the Empire is remembering they have the right to think for themselves." Valora's claws extended with a sound like knives being drawn. "This human and his pet have disrupted the natural order of things. He's destabilized an entire species that's been perfectly controlled for millennia." She stood abruptly, her robes flowing around her like living shadows. "Summon Ambassador Morrison. Immediately. This ends now." 3 hours later, Jake stood in the throne room with Ash at his side, trying very hard not to let his knees shake. The chamber was massive enough to make him feel like an insect, with ceilings that disappeared into darkness and walls lined with what looked like thousands of watching eyes. Alien courtiers filled the space, their whispers creating a sound like wind through a graveyard. But what really got Jake's attention was the way they all moved away from Ash. These were some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and they were giving one traumatized Fenrix a berth wide enough to drive a truck through. Fear rolled off them in waves Jake could almost taste. Good, some part of him thought. Let them be afraid. Let them see what they created by treating thinking beings like weapons. "Ambassador Morrison." Valora's voice cut through the whispers like a blade through silk. Every alien in the room went silent. "Your little experiment has created some complications for the Empire. Complications that need to be resolved quickly, before they spiral out of control." Jake said nothing, waiting. He'd learned in his brief time as an ambassador that sometimes silence was the best response. Valora leaned forward slightly. "I'm prepared to be reasonable about this. I'll offer you a substantial sum, enough to buy a small moon if you're interested in that sort of thing, to return the Fenrix to Imperial custody. We'll say this was all a misunderstanding, a cultural exchange that got out of hand. You go back to Earth as a hero who negotiated a profitable deal. Everyone wins." She smiled, showing teeth that belonged on something that hunted in deep water. "For the good of all species, of course." Jake felt Ash shift beside him, the Fenrix's massive body tense and ready. He put a hand on Ash's shoulder, feeling the coiled power there, the barely contained strength that could tear through steel if unleashed. "No," Jake said simply. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. "I'm sorry?" Valora's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "Ash isn't property," Jake said, keeping his voice steady even though his heart was doing its best impression of a jackhammer. "He's a person. A thinking, feeling person who deserves the right to choose his own path. And he stays with me. That's not negotiable." The court erupted. Gasps, hisses, clicks, and sounds Jake didn't have names for filled the air. Several courtiers actually stepped backward, as if expecting lightning to strike Jake where he stood. Because apparently no one refused the Empress. Ever. Valora rose from her throne, and suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Then perhaps," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made Jake's bones ache, "you misunderstand your position here, human. You have no power in this place. No leverage. No cards to play." She descended the steps from her throne, each footfall echoing like a judge's gavel. "I could simply take the creature from you. Right now. And there's nothing you or your precious Earth could do about it." Jake swallowed hard. His mouth had gone dry and part of his brain was screaming at him to back down, apologize, do whatever it took to survive this moment. But then he felt Ash lean against him, that huge head pressing into his side, and he remembered why he was here. Why any of this mattered. "Try it," Jake said quietly. Jake's first glimpse of Karath 7 made his stomach drop. The transport shuttle's windows showed a moon that looked like someone had taken every nightmare environment in the galaxy and crammed them all into one place. From orbit, he could see it all. Vast swamps that bubbled with acid strong enough to melt through ship hulls, forests made of crystal that glittered like broken glass in the alien sun, volcanic plains where rivers of molten rock carved glowing scars across the landscape, and frozen wastelands where the wind howled with a fury that could strip flesh from bone in minutes. This wasn't just an arena. This was a death trap designed by someone with a really twisted imagination. The shuttle landed at the staging area, and Jake stepped out into chaos. 19 other teams were already there, and every single one of them looked like they could tear him apart without breaking a sweat. Massive warriors and advanced armor-checked weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Their bonded creatures made Ash look small by comparison. Armored reptiles the size of tanks, serpentine horrors with triple rows of teeth and scales that seemed to shift colors, flying predators with wingspans that could block out the sun. Jake glanced down at his own gear and tried not to feel completely outmatched. He had a survival knife his grandfather had given him, some climbing rope, a water recycler that looked like it had seen better days, and a medical kit that seemed laughably inadequate given what they were about to face. No plasma rifle. No energy shields. No powered armor. Just him, Ash, and whatever they could figure out along the way. A massive creature that looked like a walking mountain of muscle and spikes shouldered past Jake, nearly knocking him over. Its handler, a Kravik warlord covered in battle scars and wearing armor that probably cost more than Jake's yearly salary, sneered down at him. "The human won't survive the first trial," the warlord muttered to his companion, loud enough for Jake to hear. "Look at him. No real weapons, no armor, and a defective Fenrix. They'll be dead within the hour." His companion, a six-legged predator covered in venomous spines that glistened in the light, made a sound that might have been laughter. Other teams were looking at Jake now, and he could feel their contempt like a physical weight. Great, Jake thought. Nothing like being the underdog that everyone expects to die first. Movement caught his eye, and he turned to see Beth approaching through the crowd. She wore armor marked with Imperial insignias, and Jake realized with a sinking feeling that she'd be observing the hunt as the Empress's official representative. Which meant she'd have a front-row seat to watch him either succeed or get torn apart. "Last chance to back out," Beth said quietly when she reached him. Her scarred face was unreadable, but her eyes held something that might have been concern. "Seriously, Morrison. No one would blame you. This thing is designed to kill even experienced warriors. You're a diplomat, not a soldier." Jake finished checking his gear, making sure every piece was secure. "Yes, they would blame me. The entire galaxy is watching. If I back out now, Earth looks weak. Humanity looks weak. And Ash goes back to being the Empress's property." He met her eyes. "That's not happening." Beth's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "You have a plan at least? Please tell me you have some kind of strategy beyond hoping for the best." "Several plans actually," Jake said, though calling them plans was being generous. They were more like half-formed ideas based on too little information and too much desperation. "None of them involve fighting fair if that's what you're asking." To his surprise, Beth actually smiled. "A real one this time." "Good. Because fair doesn't exist in this arena. These warriors?" She gestured at the other competitors. "They'll use every dirty trick they know. They'll ambush, sabotage, and backstab without hesitation. The arena itself is trying to kill you. And the Empress has probably seeded a few special surprises just to make things interesting." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "I've been watching you train with Ash these past weeks. The way you two move together, anticipate each other's actions, communicate without speaking, that's not something you can teach in 30 days of practice. That's trust. Real trust, built on respect and partnership." Her voice dropped even lower. "And trust, Ambassador, might be the most dangerous weapon you have in this arena. These other teams? They have power and weapons and experience, but their bonds are built on dominance and control. Yours is built on something they don't understand." Before Jake could respond, ask her what she meant, or thank her for what sounded suspiciously like actual advice, horns blared across the staging area. The sound was so loud it seemed to shake the ground beneath Jake's feet. The sky above them shimmered and shifted, and suddenly Empress Velora's face appeared, projected so large she looked like an angry god staring down at her creation. The hologram was visible across the entire moon, transmitted to billions of viewers on hundreds of worlds. "Let the grand hunt begin," her voice boomed, amplified to shake the air itself. 20 teams enter this arena. Only one will emerge victorious. You will face trials designed to test your strength, your cunning, and the bond between warrior and beast. Her smile was cold enough to freeze fire. Survive and glory beyond measure awaits. Fail. She paused for effect. Well, the arena is always hungry. The crowd of spectators, because of course there were spectators, thousands of them in floating observation platforms circling above, erupted in cheers that sounded more bloodthirsty than celebratory. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth had gone dry. Beside him, Ash pressed against his leg, the Fenrix's muscles coiled and ready. 20 massive gates began to grind open, each leading to a different section of the nightmare moon. Through Jake's assigned gate, he could see twisted trees that looked like they were made of black glass, their branches reaching toward the purple sky like grasping hands. The starting horn sounded, a long, mournful wail that seemed to carry a warning within it. "Stay close," Jake whispered to Ash. "We do this together. Watch each other's backs. Trust our instincts. And remember, we don't have to be the strongest. We just have to be smart enough to survive. Ash's amber eyes met his and Jake saw understanding there. Partnership. Trust. Then they stepped through the gate, leaving the staging area behind. The grand hunt had begun. The final arena made Jake's brain hurt just looking at it. A massive coliseum that hung in space itself, surrounded by nothing but stars and void. The walls weren't really walls, they were energy fields that rippled and shifted through colors Jake didn't have names for. Platforms floated in zero gravity, connected by bridges made of pure light that flickered in and out of existence. Gravity wells swirled throughout the space, creating pockets where up became down and sideways became vertical. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, and Jake had about 5 seconds to take it all in before reality crashed back down on him. Empress Valora's throne floated at the very center of the arena, suspended by nothing Jake could see. She looked like a queen from some ancient Earth legend, except her kingdom was made of starlight and her subjects were spread across 100 worlds. Below her throne, 5 platforms held the surviving teams. 5 out of the original 20. The strongest, the smartest, the luckiest warriors in the galaxy. Jake looked at the other survivors. Threx and his void serpent, still looking fresh despite everything they'd been through. 3 other pairs that had proven themselves deadly enough to make it this far. And then there was him and Ash, battered, exhausted but somehow still standing. This is the final trial, Valora's voice rang out, amplified to reach the billions watching from across the Empire. But I've decided to make a special accommodation for this historic occasion. Her smile made Jake's blood run cold. He'd seen that expression before, on the faces of people who'd already decided someone was going to die. Given the unprecedented circumstances of this hunt, the final trial will be modified. Direct combat. Elimination style. Last team standing wins everything. The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a trial anymore. This was an execution dressed up as entertainment. She was going to make him and Ash fight until they were dead, all while the galaxy watched. That's against hunt regulations. Beth's voice cut through from her observation platform, sharp with anger. The final trial is supposed to be. I am the regulations, Valora interrupted, her voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze suns. Or have you forgotten who rules this empire? Beth fell silent, but Jake could see the fury in her stance. The other 4 teams turned as one, their attention fixing on Jake and Ash like targeting lasers. Whatever rivalries existed between them, whatever grudges they'd built up over the past trials, none of that mattered now. They all knew who the real threat was. The human who'd done the impossible. The defective Fenrix who'd awakened something the Empire thought was buried forever. They were going to eliminate that threat. Together. Ash, Jake said quietly, his throat tight with fear and a dozen other emotions he couldn't name. The countdown had started, glowing numbers descending in the space above them. Whatever happens. I know, Ash interrupted, pressing his massive shoulder against Jake's leg. Trust. That one word carried everything. All the weeks of training together, all the meals shared, all the quiet conversations in the embassy yard. All the times Jake had chosen to see Ash as a person instead of a tool. The starting horn sounded like the beginning of the end of the world. 3 teams converged on their platform immediately, creatures and warriors moving with coordinated precision that spoke of years of combat experience. A armored reptile the size of a truck lunged from one side while a serpentine horror struck from another. Energy weapons discharged, filling the air with crackling death. Jake and Ash moved. Not like warrior and beast. Not like master and servant. Like 2 people who knew each other so well they didn't need words anymore. Jake rolled under a plasma blast that would have taken his head off, came up running, and headed for a support strut he'd spotted earlier. Ash twisted mid-leap, avoiding claws that would have disemboweled him, and landed on a gravity well that sent him spinning upward toward an attacker who'd thought he was safe on a higher platform. They used everything. The shifting gravity that made their opponents stumble. The floating platforms that could be collapsed if you hit the right connection point. Ash's psychic abilities not to attack directly but to disorient, making that armored reptile think a platform was 6 inches to the left of where it actually was, sending it tumbling into space. One team went down when Jake collapsed their platform entirely. Another made the mistake of chasing them into a gravity well and couldn't recover fast enough before Threx's void serpent struck from behind. But Jake could feel it in his bones, they were losing. Ash was slowing down, his dark fur matted with blood from a dozen wounds. Jake's left arm hung useless at his side, the plasma burn sending waves of agony through his entire body every time he moved. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. They couldn't win this fight. Not like this. Then Ash stopped moving entirely. Just froze in place, right in the middle of dodging an attack that would have crushed his skull. Ash! Jake shouted, panic flooding through him like ice water. Ash! But Ash didn't respond. The Fenric stood perfectly still, his amber eyes blazing with a light so intense it was almost painful to look at directly. And then Jake felt it. Something touched his mind, not violently, not invasively, but like a whisper that grew into a symphony. A presence that was vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond measure, and everywhere at once. For a moment, Jake thought he was dying, that his oxygen-deprived brain was misfiring in his final moments. Then he understood. It wasn't just Ash in his mind. It was every Fenrix in the Empire. Thousands of them. Millions maybe. All connected, all aware, all waking up at the same moment. Ash opened his mouth, and when he spoke, his voice echoed with the weight of an entire species finding its voice after 3,000 years of forced silence. Now, Ash said, we show them the surreal truth.